Welcome, everybody, to our LinkedIn Live event today. We're excited to have everybody in. Looks like the virtual room is starting to pack up. We appreciate the time and the audience. We're going to take about 20, 30 minutes. It's my pleasure to bring the power behind our security services OnDefend, Zach Hardy from that organization, as well as Bryan Bechard, practitioner and CISO in the Northeast region. He's been doing that for 20 plus years. So we have a great panel today, and the purpose of today, we're going to walk through proving cybersecurity, right? Really looking at a fireside chat, virtually fireside chat on some of the testing maturity models and how to drive that data and some of those results into your leadership teams to drive confidence across their decisions. So Bryan and Zach, thanks for joining us again today. We're going to show a quick presentation around some of the Akkodis services and OnDefend partnerships so we can tell that story. So here's our chat. Here's our subject lines today. Again, Zach and Bryan are going to dig in with some Q&A that we have from, trends, topics, and what's real in the world today, right? Around cybersecurity and some of the, challenges, some of the areas around data, AI, clearly all that is security and security posture. All right. So a quick look at Akkodis and our partnership with OnDefend. So Akkodis is a whole global IT provider. For today's focus, we are really going to lean in on security services. Okay. We have security services we run as the Akkodis portfolio, but just like a lot of our practitioners and our customers and our clients out there, we leverage third-party security services for our testing OnDefend and that team, Zach and his team. So here's a quick glimpse at Akkodis. Here's our global footprint. Again, as mentioned, we're going to drill into some of the security services today and what we do with OnDefend as that key partner. This will give you that better look at it. If you look at the right-hand column, here's the security areas we're going to hit. So clearly some of the advisory services that we can offer, fractional CISOs, some of the assessment work. Zach and Bryan will walk through some of those success stories that we've done together. All things access management, right? Security posture across those vehicles. Think infrastructure, cloud security, and then clearly a lot of the security testing. From a security testing standpoint, we're looking at some of the pen tests, some of the vulnerability work, some of the simulated attacks, so on and so forth that Zach and Bryan will cover today as part of the exercise. Here's a deeper dive into that service catalog. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. I think the Q&A and the panel conversation is really going to hit the keynotes here. But here's some of the global facts, the global positioning. But the one key thing we want to call out here from Zach, Bryan, and my seat, we recognize data and security of the data. So when you look at execution of some of these projects and deliverables, they have to be either homegrown, potentially in the US, potentially global. We have a global footprint to deliver those services where you are and where it makes sense for you from a data protection and risk perspective. I'm going to kick it over here to Zach. Zach Hardy again from the OnDefend team. Zach's going to do a quick soft intro on his side, run through some of these services, and then lean in a little bit with what we did and deliver to Bryan and his team relative to the security potential and the services together. Zach?
Absolutely. Thanks for the lead in there, Nick, and great introduction. So I'm Zach Hardy, Director of Operations at OnDefend. I have the privilege of leading the service delivery team that gets to collaborate heavily with Akkodis, and Akkodis is in customers as well. So as Nick had up on the slide there, we essentially have two main areas of focus. One is where we're addressing, process problems or process opportunities for enhancement, which is really that advisory services and kind of the subspecializations, as well as the addressing the potential technology problems or opportunities for enhancement, which is really that security testing, which is actually most of what's presented up here as kind of like the sub-specific items. So fortunately, we were really able to deliver both of those together in a combined way for Bryan, which is great. That's really how we leverage that together. We help understand a broader picture of risk and ultimately drive towards long-term value. But really that whole process engaging with the team of OnDefend and Akkodis as partners really starts even before the actual engagement itself. So one of the things that we always strive to do and where we really appreciate our partners and Akkodis in particular is that we like to be easy to do business with. Getting through procurement is a hurdle, and that's typically something that's outside of the control of the security function. But hey, we have to get there in order to even get to the starting line. So we really have a well-defined process in collaboration with Akkodis to figure out what we need to get to commercials. Nick and the rest of the Akkodis team are great. They get that turned around very quick, and then kind of able to get that through the procurement process. In terms of moving on from there, we really pride ourselves on having strong project management. We have a great deal of respect for the customer time. So We do not engage in circumstances or meetings where we're just having a meeting to have a meeting to tell you that we haven't gotten anything done. Like if the meeting can be an email, it will be. We'll be sure to follow up to make sure everyone knows, like, hey guys, here's the top 3 things that we're working on. This is where we need help with. And then where appropriate, of course, we're going to have meetings and make sure we have that deeper knowledge exchange. And that's something in my work with Bryan, I really appreciated his participation in those meetings. And I know he did as well from the other direction. Kind of moving on from there and just talking a little bit more about the details of the technical of what we do. We've really done a good job of defining our processes. So we're able to communicate clearly to the customer, hey, we know we need these 5 things in order to get started. This is basically what we need as prereqs. And then once we get that, we're ready to go. We move very quickly. We understand that your time is valuable and we're here to deliver value very, very quickly. And of course, then we collaborate heavily once we have the initial findings, making sure that the way that we're going to present that in the report is appropriate to the context and the organization, making sure that we're taking into account those details and factors that a practitioner like Bryan, because he's kind of in the main seat there, would understand. But because we're a third party, still adding that valuable perspective, we don't necessarily have that kind of full context there. So yeah, that's the core of what OnDefend does, how we engage with our partners and our end customers. And at this point, Bryan, I'll kind of hand it over to you to talk about your experience, on the other side of it, as well as kind of where it was valuable to you in your program.
Yeah, so like you said, I was the CISO for a auto finance company for the last 10 years. And so over that time, I've had to do, 4 or 5 pen tests every year against our external network, our internal network, social engineering, our web presence with our applications, and against our Azure and AWS systems. So we tested a lot of stuff over the years as the company grew and as our IT footprint grew. And we always RFP'd out request for proposal every year. So we were always looking for companies to come in and do those tests for us, as we were required to by regulations that said couldn't do it internally, and just wouldn't be cost effective for us to have that team on site and be able to have them sitting around most of the time. So we always outsourced it. So every year we went through a process to find vendors that were willing to come in and do it. And I have to say, I agree with Zach. The easiest one that I ever went through from the business side and from getting everything done, the project manager side, was with OnDefend and Akkodis. So we have several of the companies do it, and they were good on the testing side, but on the project management side and the letting us know where they were at side, it definitely was easier with you guys. So kudos there again for anyone that's looking to procure those services. I can't recommend them enough.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Bryan, I know that we did obviously quite a wide range of activities together. So one of the things I want to make sure that we talk about a bit is that NIST readiness assessment, because you'd actually been building the security program, as you mentioned, for several years. So you had done a great job of putting things together, but I know that we were essentially able to help provide that outside perspective, as well as some additional best practices that we have the advantage of encountering, because as consultants we get to go around and essentially steal the great ideas from everybody and make sure they move around. So yeah, you can see here up on the screen we have just kind of a overall visualization of that NIST framework with kind of a maturity level. Essentially the way that NIST works, as the audience may or may not know, is there's a wide range of different controls. They have different degrees of applicability to your organization depending upon your specifics. And essentially you're targeting these different maturity levels depending on the degree of relevance. Obviously, as a more mature organization, you would ultimately want to achieve that 4 or 5 level everywhere. But it is important because security has a cost to make sure that we're always maximizing the ROI, that we're really focusing the efforts where they're most applicable. So Bryan, anything to add as far as the NIST framework and how that's helpful in prioritization?
Yeah, so before NIST, you had industry-specific frameworks that you could go by. If you were in government, you went by NIST. If you were in banking, you were subject to FFIEC rules. If you were in energy, you were subject to FERC rules. But there was no one that sort of ruled them all and was sort of applicable to multiple organizations and multiple verticals. So NIST CSF came along. That's the NIST Cybersecurity framework. And it really became, in my opinion anyway, the standard that all other frameworks are sort of judged by. If you're good with NIST, if you're with the NIST Cybersecurity framework, you're probably pretty good in your other frameworks that you had to apply by as well. So that became the baseline for a lot of security programs, and that's what I used the entire time I was the CISO for my company. And what we did was, I was a self-evaluation, so I was the one telling the board and the Cybersecurity Governance Committee where I thought we were in our maturity model and our maturity journey. We had evaluators come in and do evaluations on us for the program in its entirety, but they were using a combination of things that were, as always, proprietary. So it was a little bit of NIST, a little bit of CSF, a little bit of 800, a little bit of FFIEC, a little bit of other programs they've done, and so they could sort of sell it as a proprietary package, as it were. So that was fine. It gave us good results, but we'd never done just a NIST CSF assessment. So we had OnDefend come in and do. They say, all right, we've done the assessments up to this point on the proprietary stuff. We think we're in a good spot now. We want to validate what I've been saying for the last 10 years of where we're at and get an outside opinion. And that's where we had our CSF framework assessment done by OnDefend. They did a great job and thankfully, where I thought we were and what they thought we were was pretty close. And actually, we found a few things where I was like, oh, I thought we had that settled. And we never clicked the button to say publish that policy that says certain things that make our NIST maturity level higher. It was sort of accepted and everyone was doing it, but we just didn't have it in policy. So it did find some gaps, even though we were doing fairly well. It was one of those onesie-twosie things where it's like, oh yeah, we missed this thing here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, Bryan, I know that one of the things we talked about before is, getting that validation that you can show to additional leaders within the organization, obviously, tremendously important. People outside of the security team it's just not their job to understand this. So it's always good when they can see a third party, give a thumbs up as well. Of course, as well as, like you mentioned, to be able to identify any potential gaps, essentially as part of your internal process, of course, with us as a vendor supporting, so that way you are the one identifying the opportunity for improvement rather than having that, essentially pointed out by some other party.
It's always better to self-evaluate and say, here's our gaps. Then when an auditor does come in and they realize you're self-aware, your stock price from with that auditor goes way up. They don't think you're hiding anything. They realize that you're doing the assessment you're supposed to be. And what you really want them to do when they come in is you hand them the book of knowledge that you've got of what's good, what's bad, and then they sort of flip through it. They say, yep, you're doing all the right things, and then they put it away, and you're off the hook for another 2 or 3 years until they come back again. That's where you want to get to, and that's where we're going to get to with my company.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I know one of the things that we, of course, got to do together, which was great, is not only did we have that NIST evaluation, essentially really looking at the business process or security process side of things, but of course we had the social engineering assessment combined with the penetration test, both the typical kind of PCI style external net pen that many of our viewers are probably familiar with, as well as an actual targeted credentialed web application test. So that was where we really went through the entire OWASP approach, made sure that not only was it secure from someone who didn't understand the system outside without credentials, but what could someone on the inside potentially do if credentials were breached or if there was an insider who already had access, who had alternative motives, and then essentially to look at that holistically, right? Obviously, the process side is great, but just because the control is in place which is what the process will determine, doesn't mean that it's actually functioning as intended. Yeah. So I know overall you did really, really well with that. So I was glad we got to give kind of a thumbs up on both the technical and the process side of things as well.
Yeah, so every year we were doing multitudes of tests. Like you said, the standard sort of network test. Then what we have been doing, and then testing our web pages, our external facing web presence. And then we also would always do an internal test. So when we first started that test, we had nothing on the inside. So our pen tester was able to grab credentials off the wire, get to domain admin within a couple hours, and then basically own the domain. So we said, okay, we need to put something in there that'll stop that from happening. So we put in a combination NAC and VPN in that allowed people to access from outside the company and inside the company, but encrypted all that traffic. Once we did all that, the internal test of someone walking into the building and plugging into the network went away because everything was encrypted internally on the network. So we managed to befuddle and foul up our pen testers doing that. They tried everything they could to break in, and they just couldn't. There was nothing they could do. So we said, okay, we've passed that test. Now what's next? So last year, again, I don't know if it was 24 or 23, a Canadian power company got breached because someone called up someone from the help desk and said, "Hey, I've got one of your kids or one of your parents. I don't have the exact details. Holding them hostage. You need to do whatever I say, or I'm going to harm them." So we said, okay, what if that happened here, where it was not just someone walking into the building, but someone that had credentials and knowledge of the system itself was compromised, either maliciously or being forced to do something. And so we call it the carry-on test. So on Netflix, there's a movie where a TSA agent is compromised and has to get a package through security to get on the plane. And we said, that's kind of the scenario we're going after. So we called it the carry-on test. So what we did was we set up a laptop basically and said, all right, we had the OnDefend team say, go to one of our help desk people and say, help desk person, do whatever this guy on the phone or I was on Zoom, of course, do whatever he says. Now the OnDefend team wasn't allowed to say, okay, make us an account and you approve it and do everything for us, but they would basically do anything that the person asked them to without being able to navigate, telling them internal controls or stuff like that. So we don't make it too easy, but we want to make it realistic as we could. So we ended up finding is a lot of our controls, our defense and depth controls did work. We were alerted when the OnDefend team tried to do some things that were unusual for that person. We detected it when they tried to set up a remote ping back to a remote connection back to the OnDefend team. It sort of worked, but didn't quite work. It was weird. It would turn on and then it wouldn't respond for 10 minutes. So there was something in there blocking it, but it would eventually let it through, and it was only let it through for 30 seconds and then shut it off again. So we found some interesting stuff as we were doing that test, and I think it was a big success on our side because our defense in depth capabilities were shown and proven. All that money we've been spending for the last 10 years on our tools was worth it, and we were able to. It wasn't a complete nothing happened, but we were able to limit the damage that someone like that could have caused. And we can now prove that to again auditor or investor and say, yeah, we've tried to break ourselves and we couldn't do it. We took the jab, but no haymakers and no knockouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys did really well with that. The technical team was very annoyed by the fact that the C2 beacon was intermittent when we stood up.
It's funny. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, this always works. This works every time. And nope, that one didn't work.
Yeah. Well, coming back just very briefly to NIST, of course, detection and response is really what we were focused on with that. Oh, prevention controls as well. But, as is always the case, the hacker provided enough time, we'll find something which works. Yeah. The real trick is the ability to recognize that that's happening and then take, corrective action promptly. So, I was really happy that we were able to exercise that, together. And that really comes back to this core concept we have for this webinar of wanting to validate that the investment that is in place is working as it should be, as well as kind of identifying, okay, well, here's where the improvements can happen. So that should be, targeted accordingly.
Yeah. So combining those two and having the expertise on both sides, on what I'll call the administrative side with the compliance piece of it, and then on the technical side with actually doing the pen test, it's like you said, you set up your controls. Now you're verifying that they work, and it really does help to reduce that dwell time. And really, that's where the bad guys live in, and can do a lot of damage. It doesn't matter if they break in, if they're kicked out, 5 minutes later, they're very limited damage. I'm not gonna say they can't do anything, but your damage is very limited if they have a 5-minute window, versus some of the older hacks that against like Home Depot and some of these other ones where bad guys were in their network for like a year. So obviously, if that's the case, they're going to do a lot of damage, steal a lot of data, and get a lot of stuff out. So that dwell time between the time they actually break in and the time they're discovered is super important. And I don't think a lot of companies track and test that to make sure that their dwell time is as short as possible.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, because that is definitely something that we've seen from our cyber threat intel, is essentially that the speed at which these operations are happening by malicious actors has really, really accelerated in the last couple of years. So that thing, to your point, it matters quite a bit more than it used to. It always mattered, but really getting to the point of having actually validated that like you said, that your team was able to do. Yes, we saw this activity, we would have been aware of it. When some things did work, there was additional alerting for that. Yeah, being able to identify and take those corrective actions, hugely important. And it really kind of ties into making sure that things are being evaluated from an overall maturity level, right? We want to see, what worked, as well as where the compensating factors were, and really target the investment, kind of forward facing, or really, Bryan, that's where you as a CISO are able to add the magic sauce, so to speak. I think we actually have a slide we can put up here real quick, which is just kind of like a high level roadmap of what the output of this type of combined assessment look like. We've not included the actual findings here, because of course those are sensitive and confidential. But just kind of as a high level, this is typically what we see when we collaborate with our end customers, very quickly fixing those, pen test findings. After that, making sure if there's like any type of enhancement to training, essentially something where social engineering wise in particular, if something worked that shouldn't have, there's been a corrective action for that. And then ultimately moving on to kind of some of these bigger process improvements. And then, budgeting. In this case, we put in an example of saying that we needed a new web application firewall and CDN due to a risk that would have been identified. But, Bryan, I was curious if you had any kind of additional color commentary as far as how this combined assessment type would play into this kind of long-term planning that you as a CISO are ultimately responsible for.
Yeah, so you're always thinking short term and long term. So if there's short term quick hits that you can do, patching a system, upgrading libraries on a web application, the quick hit things you always want to do and get those done, and then say, okay, how are we going to make sure that is not an issue in the future? Then there's the long term planning of, well, we're moving from an on-prem system to a cloud-based system. That's obviously going to require a complete re-architecture of any controls that you have. So you want to make sure that your knowledge of where you're at and where you're going and how you're going to get there is always current and up to date. Once a year is usually the minimum. If you can do it more than once a year and know where you're at, that's even better. So what you really have to do is get the buy-in from your company to say, all right, it's worth it to do this and prove that return on investment. So my CFO was always telling me, every time you come to me and ask for a new tool or technology, I have to sell another, 100,000 loans to pay for it. And you do realize that, like, okay, yeah, that's kind of the way you have to think of these things. Is every loan that we sent out and funded, a portion of that was dedicated to my budget and making stuff happen. So I can only take a certain percentage of that and make sure that we're as protected as we can for the investment that we're willing to do. So what we did have is, we would say for some of the areas and some of the domains, we're as mature as we want to be for that particular domain. We've hit our 2.5 or 3 level of domain maturity. To put more into it, to go to a 4 or 5 would cost us 3 times as much as it did to go from 2 to 3 and see half the number of results. And it would say, okay, I think our investment is good there. We want to keep it, we want to maintain it, we want to monitor it, but we don't want to put any necessarily more into it. I'd say, okay, so let's look at the next domain, the domain after that, and we'd figure out, okay, where can we make short-term, no cost or low cost improvements and improve our maturity, and then what's the long-term plan and what's our long-term spending and where do we want to get to, and that's how you basically have to manage your security department, because again, unless you're selling security services, unless you're OnDefend, security is 99% of the time going to be a cost center, and so you always have to justify it and make sure that your spend is where you want to be for the level of maturity you want to get to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Bryan, that overview is great. And yeah, at the end of the day, we all have to make sure the CFO is going to give us the thumbs up, right? Awesome. Welcome back, Nick.
Yeah, great stuff, guys. Bryan and Zach, appreciate the fireside chat virtually. Audience, I hope you enjoyed. Right, great little project, strategic alignment, and some unique variables in there too. Some of the traditional testing that we talked about from Edge in, some of the internal as well, some of the web tests, application work, but the simulated attack. Very unique, very creative. Bryan, I know as we scoped that out, that was something that was very new. Clearly, social engineering and some of those simulated activities are always done, and we complete those with Zach and team. But that carry-on exercise was definitely new, unique, and creative. A great job by your team, in mitigating that as well. So we appreciate that. Audience, great candor back and forth by Zach and Bryan. I hope the output of today and the goals of today, you're walking away with a couple things here. Okay, security leaders out there, and overall IT leaders. More than just your gut instinct and that gut feeling, you need evidence. As Bryan just referenced, gathering that evidence, presenting that up to the audits, those knocking on the door on a daily basis, monthly basis, annual basis, your stakeholders, your leadership team, and honestly, just internal. Right, that's the evidence you need to justify certain tasks, certain spend, and bottom line, additional investment in tools and security parameters and posture. All right. We hope you also walked away with the structure of the testing program. So the Akkodis and OnDefend, what we're proud of, and Bryan referenced, is not just the execution of the test, but that project management and the delivery and the communication around that to ensure effective results. And clearly identifying priorities and working with you to resolve, remediate, and take those steps towards resolution. Another big thing is really think of the assessment. Think about the NIST assessment. How to align yourself. What framework do you want to point to? What controls do you have in place? What do you need to work towards? Those are all key things. I know Bryan, as leaders, and Zach, we work with these leaders. Have that goal in front of you and work towards it. Right? It's a walk before you run. But the Akkodis team, the OnDefend team, we can help you get there. Right? With those steps and those stages that Zach just walked through, and the structured testing program that it brings. So hopefully you walked away with some little nuggets of great information across security, opportunities for you and your teams, and the Akkodis and OnDefend team. On behalf of our consulting groups, Bryan, thank you so much for the time today. We appreciate the partnership and the alignment over the last couple of years in our security partnership. Zach and the OnDefend team, and the Akkodis team, excited to present this webinar today and be on the lookout for Fireside Chat number 2. Thanks again. You guys have a great day. And cut.